in the pursuit of truth and common sense in an unbelievable world. You're listening to the Right Mind podcast with your host, Todd Schowalter.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Right Mind. I am your host, Todd Schowalter. We got a really interesting show for you today. Our topic is critical race theory. It's in the news a lot lately. And my guest is Carrie Bartholomew, who has a lot to say about it. Hello, Carrie. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you. That's, you said you're in Utah now. Are you recently, you moved to Utah? You left Utah? Because that's really a hotbed of a lot of the critical race news going on, isn't it?
It really is. I was surprised. I just moved here from Washington State. My husband is originally from here. And we thought that we were going to come to a safe red state. Now, critical race theory shouldn't be a red or blue issue, but here I'm finding Utah to be extremely dark purple at this point.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
When you say dark purple, what do you mean by that?
I just mean the ideas that they seem to be considering. I'm not going to say implementing because there are a lot of people against it still, but the ideas that they seem to be implementing seem to be heading us in the direction of mini California from my standpoint as somebody who just got here.
Okay. If you would, I mean, because a lot of people interpret this a lot of different ways. From your standpoint, how would you define critical race theory? Well, let's start with that. How would you define it?
Sure. Well, first, let me say that in terms of a lot of people, that's an excuse that's used a lot, kind of to not address the issue, that a lot of people define it differently. It is taught in colleges. So if it's taught in colleges, there is a very specific way of looking at critical race theory. Now, if people look at it differently, that's really on them. But the actual way in which critical race theory or critical theory is thought of is that you must look at all of life through a specific lens. So in critical race theory, that lens is you must look at life in every aspect as if through a lens of racism, as it Robin DiAngelo states, and so does Ibram Kendi, that it's not a question of whether or not racism occurred, it's how did it occur.
Okay, when you say, and obviously on a couple of my earlier shows, I've touched base on this. No, I don't think anybody denies that it occurred. I mean, it certainly did occur. I guess the question is, does critical race theory, especially in the classroom, young children, does that perpetuate? Does that maintain racism? Are we actually are we keeping racism going by the way that it's being taught in our schools?
So that's an interesting question. First off, I want to address the racism did occur. I would argue that racism does occur, okay, and that it is actually systemic racism does occur. But before people get angry with me, I want to explain that I find it completely preposterous that the people who are trying to stop it are, in my opinion, the people who have perpetuated it for years and years and years. So let me just tell you from my own personal experience in the past what critical race theory has been, and then I'll talk about what's going on in some classrooms now. I put myself in foster care when I was 8 years old. I walked down to the police station and said, I'm done, take me away, put me in foster care. Not a normal situation. Between that and being half African American and biracial, so between that and being biracial, I was considered special needs. Despite the fact that I could read well beyond my years. When I got into kindergarten, I had already read Little Women. So I could read well beyond my years as a kindergartner. I could speak to, I could have conversations and comprehend well beyond my time. Now, mind you, I have 1 year of college in my background, and that is in performing arts. So I don't have, a lot of times they will say currently today that one of the reasons that African Americans can't achieve is the language barrier, that they cannot speak properly. And the only thing that's taught me, that separated me from that, is the fact that I enjoy reading. So these ideas, these labels that we put on people, I believe is the systemic racism. When I was in middle school, I was horrible at math, which is a stereotype, but it's for me, it's true.
Right. Okay.
And they told me, we know you're trying. If you can get a C on one test, we'll give you a C for the whole year. So now that I have a middle school son, I can't help him with math. It's impossible. And that is because they expected the very least from me. As long as I was nice, smiling, and trying, they passed me. And to me, that is the, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, okay. I want to go back for a second.
Sure.
You said that, okay, you're biracial. You were identified, you were labeled as a person with special needs, specifically because of that?
Yes. So now what they have is called the ACEs, and that is an Adverse Childhood Effects of Trauma scale. And that scale, I just heard recently that they've expanded it, but it used to go up from 0 to 10, and I'm a 9 on that scale. That is all the trauma that you have experienced is supposed to predict your outcomes in the future. I hate this scale because I think that it's giving people a reason and an opportunity to consider themselves a victim or an excuse, right? So I look at it as a toolbox. Okay, well, because these things have happened to me, I have a higher proclivity towards depression or towards obesity or health disease or heart disease or anything like that. But we are what we make of ourselves. Our life is a series of choices, and for them to say that we on my channel on Age Out Rise Up, I had a person who responded to me, "How dare you try to teach us how to live differently as if we have any free will?" You can imagine what that would do to a person, that they believe that they have no free will in their lives because they're Black.
Okay, and again, I mean, your situation, I mean, that's terrible, and I wouldn't deny it. I don't think anybody would deny it. But do you think that is, in your opinion, do you think that's a common thread? I mean, do you think that's something that?
Yes, if there, so the ACEs is something that is regularly practiced in schools. A lot of the things that you'll hear are social and emotional empathy, diversity and inclusion. Those kind of things are teaching people, like if you're standing in a room and they tell you, take 2 steps forward if you are from a single parent household, take 2 steps forward if you are African American or Hispanic. You are literally walking into those labels. And then at the end of them, they want you to discuss your privilege or your lack thereof. So by the time the kids walk out of that class, they are walking away going, I'm a victim or I'm an oppressor. And they will tell you in schools, oh, but when we're talking about this, when we're talking about white privilege, we're not actually talking about race. We're talking about whiteness as a social construct. But what child is going to understand that?
Okay, and that's just it. You bring up a good point. You bring up children. One of the things that a lot of the critics of this theory are saying, especially from a school level, is that critical race theory, the way that it's being brought about, the way that they're teaching it in the schools, in some essence, is critical and makes the white children feel bad about themselves, that they aren't good enough, that based on things that their ancestors or other generations have done, that they in turn are not, they should be punished in some way for that. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I have a son who is pale with red hair and freckles, pale white. And he was told in Seattle that he is supposed to identify, that he's encouraged to identify as his oppressed side and reject his oppressive side. So specifically for biracial kids, they're taught to hate half of themselves And they would say, those who are pro CRT would say, oh, no, that's not what we're doing, but that is what you're doing. And unless your kid has very thick skin and you talk about it all the time, those seeds are being planted in these kids. I knew of a child in our neighborhood, two children in our neighborhood who were best friends. And the Black child decided he no longer wanted to play with his white friend anymore because they hurt him just because they're white, even though it was his best friend.
And who taught him this?
These things are taught in schools. These are what they're hearing. They're hearing this in schools, and they're hearing this online. They're hearing it sometimes in, if you look at YouTube commercials, sometimes are talking about these kind of things. So it's everywhere. I'm a big proponent that children should just have, if they're going to have a phone, and when I say children, I'm specifically talking about middle school because that's who I'm most involved with. Although I did teach children's theater to children K through 6th. And, those kids never came up to me and said, Mrs. B, my brown teacher. They were Mrs. B, my fun teacher. But when this all started, I was reached out to by 4-H, and they were like, we want you to run the Snohomish County theater program. And I was like, why? I'm flattered, but why? And the reason is because they needed more equity. They needed to see more diversity in the program. And I'm not interested in being a token for the left, because I feel like, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most damaging thing to the African Americans' progress is the white liberal. So, and that comes from teachers teaching you that, you need to do little.
Let's go back to that really quick, because that's an interesting point. Yeah. You say the biggest problem, or the biggest obstruct, I should say, is the white liberal. Okay. Yes. I've seen a lot of this. Expound on that a little bit, if you would.
Sure. I have quite a friends who, because my background is in theater, I have quite a few friends who come from Evergreen Community College in Washington.
Right. Okay.
And when like election seasons, all the way back to Obama, when election seasons would start, every single time I would get messages, you're really letting your people down. You're kind of, you just don't understand what you're doing. This is so important, and I can't believe you're not standing with us. Just this idea that I have to be a monolith, which is, I've come to realize how a lot of my white liberal friends, who I have more so than I do actually conservative friends, or I did, think of me as somebody that they need to take care of. Think of me as somebody that they need to save. And what an insult. Coming from where I've come from, climbing up and creating a life that I can be proud of, and then to have these people say that I don't know my own mind is just a complete slap in the face.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of that. Just this week, I'm in St. Louis, and a community here by us, or part of us rather, a church had a Black Lives Matter sign, not destroyed, but it was damaged. And there were a lot of protests, as could be expected, but all of the protesters were middle-aged white people, okay, from this primarily from this prominent community. You didn't see anybody that, I would have expected normally to be there. But, to me, it's almost as if we're fueling this situation. It's coming from people you wouldn't expect. I mean, people that are not being, nothing's happening to them. I mean, they're the cream of the crop, and they're out there, like you said, on your behalf. Oh, you can't treat them this way. And if you were to come forward, so let us speak for you. That's just kind of like that's how I see it. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. See, the thing for African Americans is that they raise up some leaders, right? Or white people feel like the same thing. Not all white people, obviously, but white liberals feel like, they need to be leaders. They need to look out. They need to be our, what is the word, ally, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as we tell them, I don't need I don't need that from you. No, thank you. They can get pretty vicious.
Yeah, I know.
My son, my husband ran for state rep when we were in Washington, and people, with these signs that are like kindness matters, or, love trumps all, or whatever else, right, would come out and they would yell and scream at my son to the point that he had to wipe spit off his face. And they'd say, how do you like having a white supremacist for a father? And my son, 12 years old, would look at them and say, you haven't met my mom, have you?
Right. It's almost, it's as if they're using you.
Absolutely. I got jumped by a girl who looked like me. So right. because I held a sign that had Martin Luther King's face on it and said, they are using us, character matters. And because I have said things like, do not consider me to George Floyd. And I'm sorry if that's a trigger for people, but I have always felt like that sign, that whole BLM movement should say criminal lives matter. And the thing is that every Black person is not a criminal. So sure. For them to say that we all are oppressed, baloney. We all are afraid of the cops. Not true. I'm not afraid. I have a police officer for a neighbor. Not afraid of him at all. Why? Because I don't commit crimes.
Right. And it just seems, again, and we're kind of going into even a new subject that's all part of the narrative.
Right.
But one of the things that I've touched on in the past is you have this group primarily of angry white liberals that feel like we're going to use you to support our cause, but you also have a wonderful voice. You have a vehicle called the media that right. grabs onto that and promote. I mean, it's almost like a spoiled, selfish kid saying, "Look at me."
It's complete and utter entitlement.
Yes,
this victimhood is complete and utter entitlement that they've taught people to be. What is the problem with Black society? Well, you've taught them to resent everybody else. You want to talk about racism in school, then we need to talk about racism in every direction. You can't just tell these kids, oh, you can't be racist unless you're white. Because I'm sorry, if you hate somebody without ever knowing them, just because they walk in a room and look different than you, you have some issue, you have some ism going on.
Sure.
And it's being supported. It's being taught in our schools. When you tell kids, step into the circle, you're the oppressed, you're the oppressor, how are you not going to look at the person next to you and go, they've got more than me? So we're setting the seed of resentment that has always, in every self-help book, in every culture, it's always, always, always that if you can't forgive and if you can't move on and you can't have a spirit of gratitude, you're going to be crippled.
I totally agree. Yeah.
And they're teaching them to be crippled. And I just like this idea in California, in one county, they're saying that if you're on welfare, you get $500 more a month if you're Black.
Right. And that is okay. I wanted to ask about that too. I mean, go ahead though.
So there's two parts to that, right? There's the resentment because of course there's so much of this idea that only Black people need that money. One of my best friends, who is a former foster, she's so poor that she's trying to do a GoFundMe for a $7 heater for her house, or $70 heater for her home.
And this person is white?
And she's white. She's from Appalachia.
Okay. Right.
So you said that, but then on top of that, the other side that we're not looking at is why would we incentivize more so African Americans to stay on welfare?
Yes.
Look at this. We're constantly treating. In my opinion, we have the most racist administration we have ever had. Oh. Everything is about race all the time. We're not going to fire this person who said something extremely offensive because we'd never fire a Black person. Right. Wow. Right. So we have no merit. We have no responsibility for our actions. Why? Or the reason that in the first place that I was immediately against BLM is because when the first incidents were happening, our schools put out information and said, go to this page and learn how to be a white ally. Well, I wanted to know what they were saying. So I went to the page and it was like, if you ask questions, if you ask the why something has happened, well, that's just showing your racism. Well, I follow what Solzhenitsyn said, which is let the lie come into the world, let it triumph even, but not through me. I will not fall to a lie because media tells me to, or because, big celebrities say that I need to, because we've seen what a culture of lies does. We're seeing it right now.
Absolutely. And don't you think, it's almost like nepotism in a way when you have somebody that's related to somebody that goes on to do great things. Don't you think that for the Black community they achieve great things and they do it on their own, and then you're going to have people say, well, that's just because they got that position because they were Black, and that's
we are going backwards. We are going backwards. The Seattle Public Library decided last summer to have their staff meeting and to have it coloreds and white people separately, and that's when I was like, we have to move. And then right after I was assaulted, my son's band teacher wore a pin that was BLM.
You were assaulted. Go back to that. You were assaulted when you were at the protest with the Martin Luther King sign?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Okay.
Yes. And so the week after that, and the girl so what happened is there were these two young white women, girls. They're like 17. And they're just, they behave exactly like the Nazi brown shirts. Exactly. They say the same things. Their eyes are dull. And when you try to talk to them, I've been a youth group leader for years, and I can talk to kids. And when I try to talk to them, they respond the same way. We can see you will not agree, so we will not engage.
Okay.
And that's what they say. And then they just turn and they hold their signs that say things like, we demand free healthcare and housing is healthcare. They're little soldiers.
It's like being brainwashed to an extent.
They're completely being brainwashed.
Right.
I believe our kids are completely being brainwashed, and the only options that we have, like right now, I'm trying to encourage people to do small things like over the summer. Invite the neighborhood kids over, especially if you have your own kids. Invite the kids over and put in a movie that pushes unity, and then discuss it with them. Buy them pizza and discuss it with them. Do whatever you can to set the seeds of unity, or that there are lies and that you are going to be told them in school. So this is the only way that we can fight them, is to bring them back. Because one of the things that they're doing in school when they teach this oppressive thing, they're not thinking about the truth. One, that how about if there is a Black child who is the child of a doctor and a lawyer who happen to be Black? It's not that far-fetched. This is 2021, right?
Sure. So I actually know some. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have that situation, right? And then in that same, like in Utah, there's an opioid crisis. So say you've got a white boy in the back who happens to have a father in prison and a mom who's trying to get clean, or maybe not even trying to get clean, maybe is still currently an addict. You're going to really tell that child in that class who is going through hell in his personal life that he is an oppressor? How dare you?
And again, I think it comes back to the labels and everything. It's other people projecting that label on someone else. And I believe that the media rather is a great mouthpiece for that. They're on board with it. If they say if it bleeds, it leads. And in this case, racism and all of that leads. And that's what they want to stick with. Back in 2007, John Roberts said in the Supreme Court, in a nutshell, the way to stop, as far as discrimination, the way to stop discriminating is to stop discriminating, meaning that, to stop, the whole, the way I interpret it, as far as the schools are concerned, one of the ways to stop racism is to quit, teaching racism to the extent that we're just going to keep that fire burning. Agree or don't disagree? Agree or disagree, rather?
No, I completely agree. I think going back to that exercise of the kids stepping into the circle, right? The way that was originally done was step in the circle if you like pizza, step in the circle if you went camping this summer. Anything that would bring unity. So I don't believe that we should just be banning critical race theory and specifically the 1619 Project and anything that has to do with equity, because equal outcomes are not the same as providing opportunity. If you have two people in the same house, they're not going to have equal outcomes because one's going to be more interested in working hard and one might not be as interested. So this idea of equity, that we all have equal outcomes. First off, the people pushing it are billionaires.
Right.
So why are they doing that? Why are billionaires pushing that we should all the rest of us should have an equal outcome? And I don't want the same outcome as somebody who plays video games all day and smokes pot. That's not the outcome that I want out of life.
Sure, it's human. It's not race, it's human. Right.
Yeah. So yes, the things that they are, I absolutely believe that not only should we ban critical race theory, but we should have an alternative that brings unity.
I totally agree. And you know what? This has been a fascinating show. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'd like for you to touch base on another thing that I've talked about in the past, is that the way that I've seen it, and other guests have kind of seen it as well, is that critical race theory, it seems to take, somebody, if they're on one level and somebody's on a lower level, let's bring them down. Let's beat them down so they're down at this level. Why are we not working on bringing everyone up to a higher level or an equal level, rather than bring people down, as it seems to be, which seems to be the case in this whole critical race teaching curriculum that we're looking at? Why can't we just bring everybody up and make everybody feel better about themselves, and everybody gets along and everybody loves each other? Why do we have to punish someone? Thoughts?
Yeah, because we're ran by actual white supremacists. We are ran by systemic racism. These people truly believe that minorities cannot achieve. So how are they going to lift them up? Like pushing them down? It's surprising to me that they're willing to push other people down as well. But at the same time, like, they're getting rid of gifted programs and exchanging that for time for empathy programs. And the thing is that there were other opportunities. You can do Scouts and 4-H and all of these other ideas, to learn those other skills. I believe that schools should be lifting everybody up to be their absolute best.
Absolutely, regardless.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning white supremacists. Go ahead.
Oh,
you were mentioning like white supremacists. One of the things, a lot of the in the education system, especially the young, actually the whole education system, it seems, that's not a lot of white supremacy there. You have, obviously you have some scholars and things like that.
Well, but I think that even Black people who, I think that the Black people who are making $7,000 to $15,000 to $50,000 for speaking, that are pro CRT, I think that they are selling their culture. So I believe that they're pushing white supremacist ideas too. Maybe they believe it, which is the saddest thing I've ever heard, that you would actually believe that you have no free will, that you would actually believe that the bar needs to be lowered for your people to compete. Maybe they believe that. I have a hard time believing that when they're making a crap load more money than I am speaking for free. You know what I mean?
Really? Or me too. I have a podcast.
Yeah. So I'm just like, I have a hard time believing that. I think the Black culture for the longest time has had people who have profited off of talking about how oppressed people are while they live in mansions.
Yeah, I tell you, we have 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you a question I ask all my guests. You're in charge of everything right now. You have 2 minutes. How are you going to fix it? What are we going to do here to make everything better for everybody? Go ahead.
All right. I think that families need to prioritize their children again. Let's stop handing them technology and sending them off to go play in their rooms, and not being connected with them, because connected with families is important. And I think that communities also need to take a stand. You cannot stick your head in the sand and pretend that these things are not happening or write them off as red and blue. Instead, we have to work on what unites us, makes us stronger, because I believe that our culture right now is focused on divided we fall. And I think that there are a lot of people invested in watching the fall of our country.
I love that. United we stand. Now, let's all stand together. I couldn't say it better. That's what a way to wrap things up. That's fantastic. One last thing, you have a podcast yourself, Carrie. I'd like to, we'll put it on the screen as well, but would you like to introduce people, our listeners, our viewers, to your podcast? Can you tell us a little bit about it and how we can enjoy it?
Sure. I actually do. Well, I do one, and I'm starting another one actually today. The one that people might be more interested in is called Martin's Daughter. There's also a Facebook page for it. My goal is to just really teach people how to unify, to highlight and, like you are doing, interview people specifically on critical race theory, but people who refuse to be in that victim mindset, and those people who want to see not a colorblind society, but a society in which we can see and admit and embrace all things, and where our isms don't really matter.
I love it. No, that's great. Well,
sorry, it's Martin's Daughter, and then my other one is Age Out, Rise Up.
Okay, can you spell that? Age out. What's that again?
Age Out, Rise Up. Which is really specifically for people who are in rock bottom, who are trying to lift their lives up.
Got it. We'll put both of those on the screen when this comes out. Once again, Carrie Bartholomew, you've been wonderful. I've really enjoyed our talk today. This is great. You've been enlightening. You said a lot of things that I think have been on a lot of people's minds, and it's great to hear from you. And I couldn't thank you more for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. And once again, this is Todd Schowalter with Right Mind. Thanks for joining us. And remember, if you don't have a right mind, you don't have a mind at all. See you next time. Bye-bye.
This has been the Right Mind Podcast with Todd Schowalter.